iPhone 18 Pro Max, and that's the moment it stopped making sense because on paper this should be a win. Yet the numbers tell a very different story. Something that looks like progress is quietly creating a problem Apple almost never admits, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everyone's focused on the headline changes, the flashy stuff, the easy upgrades, but there's one trade-off buried underneath all of this that changes who this phone is actually for. Not today, not in the first minute, but by the end of this, you'll understand why this model is more controversial than it looks. What makes this interesting isn't that there are leaks. There are always leaks. It's that for the first time in a long time, the leaks don't all point in the same direction. Some of them sound incredible. Some of them sound like Apple quietly crossing a line. And those two things are happening at the same time. Here's the context you need, and only the context you need. This is a Pro model that's supposed to justify its name again, not with one big redesign, but with a series of decisions that compound: weight, cameras, silicon, materials, even timing. Each one on its own sounds reasonable. Together they create something very different. And if you've ever upgraded thinking, this is the safe year to do it, this is exactly the kind of year where that instinct can backfire. So, before we get lost in specs, let me give you the first real insight early because this matters more than any single feature. This phone isn't chasing excitement. It's chasing control. Control over performance, control over thermals, control over the camera pipeline, and even control over when you feel like upgrading. That goal explains almost every leak you're about to hear. Let's start with the part most people won't feel immediately, but absolutely will live with: the physical reality of this thing. The Pro Max is getting heavier again, thicker again. On its own, that sounds boring, but context matters. This would make it the heaviest iPhone Apple has ever shipped, heavier than the stainless steel era, and Apple doesn't add weight casually. The obvious assumption is battery, and yes, some of that mass almost certainly goes there, but the more important reason is structural. Inside, things are changing, cooling is changing, component density is changing, Apple is packing more into less space, and physics always sends the bill. What's interesting is how this pairs with the back design rumors. You're hearing two completely opposite directions. One says transparency, leaning into a liquid glass aesthetic, letting you glimpse the internals. The other says the exact opposite, make everything look uniform, seamless, almost monolithic. Those aren't just design choices, they signal philosophy. One is expressive, the other is controlled. Historically, Apple always chooses control. That should already tell you which rumor is more likely, even if the transparent version sounds cooler. Colors fit into this same pattern: brighter, punchier tones returning, purple making another appearance, deeper, moodier finishes like burgundy. And yet, the quiet absence of black, that's not an accident. Dark anodized aluminum shows wear faster, and Apple hates visual entropy. Again, control over time, not just day one. Now let's talk about the first change that actually alters how you use the phone: the camera, and not the one everyone's going to put in the thumbnail. The headline feature is variable aperture on the main camera. On the surface, this sounds like Apple finally catching up to something Android phones experimented with years ago. But this isn't about checking a box, it's about giving the system more flexibility when conditions change. A fixed aperture is predictable. Predictable is great for computational photography, but it's limiting. Variable aperture lets Apple decide in real time whether it wants light, sharpness, or control, low light photos, bright daylight video, controlled motion without pushing shutter speed. This is Apple giving the camera more physical authority before software steps in. There's a reason other companies walked away from this. It's expensive, it's complex, and it only makes sense if you're deeply invested in the entire imaging stack, which Apple is. But here's where it gets more interesting. This camera change doesn't exist in isolation. It's paired with a new main sensor, and for the first time in years, it's not coming from Sony, Samsung stepping in as the supplier. isn't just a sourcing story. It suggests Apple wanted something Sony wasn't offering, a custom stacked sensor design that prioritizes speed, noise control, and dynamic range rather than raw size or megapixels. If you've been waiting for a massive sensor jump 10, this probably isn't that year. And that's intentional. Apple isn't chasing spec sheet wins here. They're chasing consistency, faster readout, cleaner shadows, fewer processing compromises, the kind of improvements you don't notice in a store, but you notice after a year. And this is where opinions start to split. Some people want dramatic change, others want reliability. This phone is very clearly for the second group. Up front, things get quieter but still important. A higher resolution front camera, likely using more of the sensor that's already there. A slightly smaller dynamic island. Not because Face ID is going under the display yet, but because Apple is optimizing space millimeter by millimeter. That might sound incremental, but it ties directly into what's happening under the hood. The A20 Pro is the real backbone of this entire device, a new process node, new packaging, and a fundamentally different way of arranging the silicon. By integrating memory closer to the processor, Apple reduces latency, improves efficiency, and frees internal space. This isn't just about speed. This is about sustained performance, about running demanding tasks without thermal throttling, about AI features responding instantly instead of hesitating, and yes, about battery life that doesn't collapse under load. Pair that with a redesigned vapor chamber, potentially using stainless steel for better heat distribution, and you start to see the pattern. Apple is building a phone that can maintain its performance envelope longer than before, not just hit higher peaks. Connectivity follows the same logic, a new in-house modem that brings back millimeter wave while improving efficiency, more control, less reliance on third parties, fewer variables Apple doesn't own. None of this is flashy, and that's exactly why it's easy to misread this phone, because when you step back, the iPhone 18 Pro isn't trying to wow you on day one, it's trying to age better than the model it replaces. Heavier, yes. Thicker, yes. But also calmer, more predictable, more stable over time. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question. Who is this actually for? If you upgrade every year chasing novelty, this might feel underwhelming. If you skipped a generation or two and want something that feels locked in for the next several years, this suddenly makes a lot more sense. Apple is betting that people are tired of fragile excitement, that they want something that feels engineered, not marketed. And that's a risky bet because it doesn't generate instant hype. It generates quiet satisfaction. The irony is that this could be one of the most important Pro models Apple has released in years, precisely because it doesn't scream about it. And once you notice that shift, you start seeing it everywhere in these leaks. Fewer experiments, more consolidation, fewer risks you feel immediately, more benefits you feel over time. That's why this phone is harder to judge from a spec list, and why by the time people realize what Apple actually optimized for, the narrative around it will already have changed. The real verdict on this device won't come from launch day reactions. It'll come months later, when people realize they stopped thinking about their phone altogether. And for Apple, that might be the most pro move of all. See you next one. Peace out.